Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country, around the world, around the universe, happy fucking summer. Summer is finally here. We got a lot to celebrate. We got a lot to process. We got a lot to think about. And Memorial Day is gonna formally kick off summer, but it's been summer here at Righteous Media for a couple weeks now, as you know. And I can think of no better way to end spring, turn a page on the pandemic, start summer, and think about the future than bringing back one of our most popular guests ever in 116 episodes. The great and powerful Sebastian Junger is back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
You were here February 6th, I think. It was the last episode of Angry Americans, and then we shifted. You and I have now coordinated our wardrobes. So if people are watching on video, we have an almost identical, I think it's a gunmetal gray t-shirt. Yeah. We didn't plan this.
No, we didn't.
I felt like coming into it, I was like, gunmetal gray is the right color for Sebastian. And I got my hat on because I'm in full summer mode and I'm going to get outside all weekend with the family. But you are, it looks like you're back in New York, but I want to reconnect with you and ask you, where are you and how are you?
I'm in my apartment with my family in the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
And the book Freedom, we're going to get deep into it. I fucking love it. I'm really excited to talk to you about it. I think it's the book for this time, and I'm going to talk a lot about why. But the book dropped 8 days ago, and you've been everywhere. You've been on Joe Rogan. You know, you're doing tons of press. How does it feel to finally have this book out there and to be doing this again?
Oh, it's thrilling. My last book, Tribe, was out 5 years ago, I think. So that's, it's been a while. Since then, I've had 2 children, a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. So the fact that there isn't a physical, around the country 20-city book tour is actually pretty good. I mean, I sort of miss being in bookstores and whatever and actually meeting people, but I definitely miss that. But I think it would have been very, very hard on the whole family had I been gone for 3 weeks.
So I went back and looked at it. You and I have done a lot of stuff around Memorial Day over the last decade or so. And on May 19th, 2010, I interviewed you on C-SPAN for an hour-long book event. I think it was in Los Angeles. I don't know where it was, but you and I were in a room doing a C-SPAN event. That feels like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then after my buddy Tim died, I think I flew out to California and did something with you guys. If I'm remembering correctly, I sort of remember your face in there, those sort of weird weeks that followed his death.
Yeah, I don't think I told this the first time we talked, but we were scheduled to honor you and Tim in Los Angeles.
Right.
And I was running IAVA at the time. And you guys were in Libya and we were getting updates, right? It was like, okay. And we weren't sure you're going to make it, right? We were going to honor both of you. And we were on the plane out to Los Angeles. And I remember getting a note from your PR people. And I had 5, 6 of my crew around us on our way to Los Angeles for this big event. And I was like, oh shit, they're not going to be able to make it. I was just expecting you guys were going to get tied up because the violence was there. But it was on the plane that we learned that Tim was killed.
Yeah.
And then we landed in LA and I thought you were going to back. I was like, God, you got so much going on. You guys aren't going to do this, but you said, I want to press on. I want to do it. And I'm thinking about your book, but before we get to that, I remember a couple of flashes of that thing. And it must've been an incredibly difficult and wild time for you. But I remember us sitting around a fire drinking.
Yeah.
We were in the back of a hotel. It was you, me, a bunch of vets, a couple people from your team. And it made me think of this book because it was this moment where we had this fire and just us and pain.
Yeah, that's right. And I actually wasn't in Libya with Tim at the last minute. I couldn't go. So I was actually in New York, and it was really interesting because even though I was 6,000 miles away, because I was supposed to have been there, and because he and I were in a lot of combat together, and because he died in combat, I managed to make it completely my fault. And I was doing something that I saw soldiers do that I never understood. Like, what are you talking? about. It's not your fault. He took a bullet to the forehead at the top 300 meters away at the top of a hill. How could that be your fault? I never got it until I watched myself do that with Tim. And it actually was quite a struggle to climb out of that. And if he died in a car accident, I wouldn't have felt that way. And if he and I hadn't been in combat together, I wouldn't have felt that way. It's that particular combination that's devastating.
Mm. And I remember, I don't know if I said it to you or I said it to maybe one of the folks on your team. I said, actually, this is probably a good place for you to be, because if you were in New York City on the Lower East Side or wherever you were walking around, you probably didn't have too many people who could relate. But I remember around that circle, all of us had lost close friends, all of us who had been through that. And I felt like we could be there in some way to give you some kind of emotional connection or understanding that maybe nobody else could. But we were also, it was juxtaposed with, I think we were in a hotel in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
So, right. So like we're sitting around a fire talking about combat and death, and like right across the way, there's like fancy people having drinks and partying and couldn't be any further away from the combat that was happening there and around the world. Right.
Yeah. That's right.
So is that, Sebastian, is that kind of the last, 20 years of your life, like going into these intense places and then coming back to a country that kind of lives life uninterrupted? When you and I talked in 2010, it was about Afghanistan. Tribe has been really important. Freedom now, I think, is a real important exploration of many things, but also fighting and a reckoning of our history and who we are. But, you were walking on train tracks for 400 miles, right, in total isolation. And then afterward, and we'll get into the book, like afterward, did you go back to Lower East Side? Where'd you go afterward?
Well, I stopped war reporting after Tim and I finished up in the Korangal Valley in eastern Afghanistan in 2008. And, I was going to go back. I was going to go back into it. I was going to go to Libya with Tim. At the last minute, I couldn't. And then after Tim got killed, I was completely out. And, mostly I saw what getting killed does to everyone you love, because I watched it happen to everyone that was in Tim's life. And I just thought, I don't want to do that to everybody. I mean, it felt all of a sudden war reporting looked selfish rather than noble, and selfish rather than, daring or something. And so I completely stopped. And, but the railroad lines were a kind of interesting substitute, because of course there is something going on in combat, or even just in travel in rough countries. You don't even have to be in combat, but just, the developing world is a pretty intense place. And there's something very good and meaningful in that. And there was something about the railroad lines, which are, these swaths of no man's land that crisscross America. There's really no police presence unless they're actively looking for you, which happened to us once. You can sleep, you can sleep under bridges and abandoned buildings, and there's all kinds of marginal characters out there. And we were cooking dinner over fires and getting our water out of creeks. And it's not really the wilderness. It's not quite the ghetto. It's not quite, it's sort of a little bit of everything. And there definitely is our sort of like tactical issues of not being seen by the authorities and all that, because it's completely illegal. And there was something about that, and doing that with 3 other guys, that was just completely addictive. Like, I loved it out there, and it sucked out there. I mean, physically speaking, it sucked, right? It was hard. We were carrying 70 pounds. We froze in the winter. We boiled in the summer, on and on. But my God, did I love it.
So let me summarize this for folks, right? So you write a book. It's called Freedom. It's out 8 days ago. Everyone should get it. And this is what I want you to know. I finished it last night. I was listening to it and reading it at the same time. And as soon as I finished it, I started buying it for people. And I thought about who I knew, and I started going through like all these people, different people in my life, who most of them I sent the audio version. And I said, listen to this, because I know you're running around, you're busy. And I really wanted to make sure they got it. Right. But the book is short too. It's only 176 pages. But the last time I did that was John Lewis's graphic novel, March, which I felt like was a gateway into so many things for so many people. And especially maybe a book for people who don't read books.
Right.
And Chuck Palahniuk wrote that once, and I was lucky enough to have him review my book, and he said something like, I write books for people who don't read books. And I tried to get people into my book, and I feel like freedom is bigger than a book, in the same way Tribe was bigger than a book. And I wrote some notes that I want to share with you, that I said, it's about your 400-mile journey with a couple other guys on the train tracks through America, but it's about much more. And you break it up into 3 sections, into run, fight, and think, all of which could be their own books and maybe will be, or Netflix specials or films or something else. But the top line that I took away from it was a love letter to the land of America. It was a history lesson on our founding, but also on our DNA as a nation in all its complexity. It was one of the best summaries I heard of Native American fortitude, history, exceptionalism. And maybe this is one part that anybody who's ever been in the military, the best exploration of walking, running, munching, marching, and humping I've ever read or heard. Like the misery of walking with huge amounts of weight on your back. Any infantry person needs to read this and understand this. But there's a definition of toughness. It's a perfect Father's Day gift. I'm going to give you the whole sales pitch. Some damn fine writing. And I said mandatory reading, a new Bible, especially for infantrymen worldwide. But I think it's the perfect book for this time, because America's reflecting on our struggle, and we prepare to kind of re-experience and redefine freedom after the pandemic as we get to this Independence Day on July 4th. So this is a book of the moment, and I hope it resonates in that way. It did with me, and I could go much deeper in each of the sections, but I wanted to say that to you. And I wanted people to hear that and understand this is much more than a book. But you've been talking about this for a week. You're going to talk about it for weeks. What do you want to say about the book that maybe you don't get to say anywhere else?
Yeah. Well, thank you for all that. First of all, that's exactly the kind of reader reaction as I was writing the book, that I was kind of fantasizing somebody might have, it's like that it would affect people like that. So first of all, there are a lot of people in the military or former service that read my work. And, as you said, walking with a heavy weight is its own particular task, its own particular kind of work. It's very hard work. But what's interesting about humans is that the things that are the hardest can also sometimes be kind of ecstatic, right? You could hit, I don't know what it is, like a stride, a state of mind, whatever it is, that we're all of a sudden, as I say in the book, stopping looks harder than keeping going. Right. That's how you're in the groove. It was like, no, it's just going to be easier to keep walking. Stopping looks like it's going to suck. Like, that looks tiring. I'm going to keep rolling because I am buoyed up by my brothers around me, and by some hand that has, some force that is making me feel superhuman. And, I think I think we're all looking, whatever our endeavor, walking, writing, music, combat, ballet, whatever it is, I think we're all looking for that feeling of wow, I'm something has to be helping me here, because I'm feeling things and doing things. I'm expressing myself in ways I didn't know were available to me. It's extraordinary. And so, we had that along with a lot of really shitty times. We would hit that feeling. And, I think, I guess what I would say to answer your question is, I mean, you have an audience that is both thoughtful, contemplative, and a lot of service members, former service, who have done a lot of hard work, like physically hard, difficult things. And that those things don't come together that often in a person, right? And so I think I would like to say that for a lot of human history, you can have a conversation about democracy and stuff like that. It's all important, but it's for a lot of human history, humans maintained their freedom from a dominant power by working, by running, by fighting. It's a very physical, freedom is a very, very physical thing until you get into really sort of modern society, and it's a different kind of conversation. But I want people to understand that the times they've carried 80, 100 pounds over a mountain ridge in the heat, like they're doing exactly what people have done for thousands of years to make sure that they were autonomous and self-defining.
And you I almost I want to call it like a love letter to hard work, and there's a bit of like a love letter to suffering. So anyone who's ever been through anything hard, I think will connect with this book in a powerful way. But there is a bliss to working so hard that you go to a Zen mode, right? Like you talked about that. I remember being an infantryman training overseas, walking for so long that you think you're asleep and your mind goes to another place, and it's an out of body experience where you're almost not controlling your feet and your feet are moving. You break down cadence in a way that's really beautiful. And you talk about how, the weight on your back and how it really, the mind of it, which is something I didn't really know until I was pushed beyond my limits in the military. I kind of knew it in sports, but in the military, when you must, in training, if you don't push beyond that level, you're letting down your buddies, or you don't go away for the weekend, or you're a piece of shit, right? But then later on, your life depends on it. And to go beyond those limits, and the way you explained it was really profound. I mean, I've heard people comparing you now to Hemingway, and saying that, I felt like this is an on the road almost for a new generation. This is going to inspire thousands of people are going to be on the train tracks now.
Right.
But also the exploration of fighting, and all the kinds of fighting for freedom, fighting for independence, and examination of indigenous people, the role of women in combat. You talk about Muhammad Ali. I wanted to pull that piece out because I feel like so many people feel like they've been fighting for the last year.
Right.
And you talk about how unfree we really are in so many ways.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're politically very free, but we live in a society where most of our survival tasks for most people have been outsourced to specialists. So we're dependent on a supply chain. We're dependent on a system that we then work very hard inside of, but we're working hard so we have money to buy the things we need to survive. And so we have a kind of, dependency is not autonomy, right? They're different things. And we have chosen to be extremely productive as a society. I mean, we've walked on the damn moon, right? Like we've done extraordinary things, extremely productive, but also extremely dependent on the society compared to a sort of smaller scale hunter-gatherer type economy, which is where, of course, our human origins lie. And so I think it's very important to make the distinction between different kinds of freedom. We have, freedom's a misused word. And often when people talk about, don't take away my freedom within the society, what they're really saying is don't take away my rights, right?
Right.
Freedom, in its purest sense, freedom means that an enemy, an outside force cannot dominate you and dictate who you are or if you're going to live, right? That, in its original sense, freedom meant that wasn't going to happen to you, that you're able to defend yourself. That the origin of the word freedom is Middle German, Vriedom, which means beloved, which means that everyone that's in your clan, in your tribe, in your people, those people are free. You cannot enslave them or kill them. Everyone else in the world is eligible for that. And of course you are with them. And so if you can't defend yourself, you're not going to be free. Within your own society, you're really talking about rights. And so my book is divided into run, fight, and think. Basically, the first thing people do is try to outrun a dominant society. And if they can't outrun them, I have the Apache as an example. They were on the run for 300 years. And, it took almost till 1900 for the American military to sort of like confine them and subdue them. They try to outrun their potential oppressor. And if they can't, they have to outfight them. And interestingly, with humans at the individual level, but it also scales up nicely, the smaller person or the smaller group is often able to defeat a larger person or a larger group. That's not true with elk, right? Or grizzly bear or bison or mice or whatever. Size is a predictor of outcome. With humans, that's not true. And that allows, for example, the Montenegrins, a wild mountain tribe in the early 1600s, fought the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire came in to make the Montenegrins a vassal state. And the Montenegrins were outnumbered 12-1. And they were like, you know what, maybe not. And this is a longer conversation. And the Montenegrins destroyed them 3 times, right? Annihilated this vastly superior force. And if a smaller force couldn't do that, there would be no freedom in the world. The world would be dominated by fascist megastates. And it's, thank God it's not. And then finally, if you can't outfight them, if you're part of the society, and which is where we have a conversation about America, if you're part of a society, you're not going to overthrow the government, right? That's not what you're trying to do. You're standing up for your rights, and basically you have to outthink them. And that, like the labor movement 100 years ago, there were very courageous and smart people who basically played chess against the big corporations and the American government, and forced them to come to terms with a fair with fair laws for labor, right? It was extraordinary. These are powerless people, and they did it. They played chess and they won.
There's so many pieces of that. The part about the Apache is amazing. Okay. The part about the Montenegrins is amazing. I also grew up loving trains, and I feel like it's a history lesson on American railroads and on the technical components. And, when you get to the fight part, you describe the creation of the American railroads like a war story. It feels like I'm reading Band of Brothers, right, but it's about the creation of the American railroad, which is maybe equally as important, if not more important. I think you make that case, in there in some way about the importance of it. But there are these war stories that are amazing, where you talk about like a grasshopper swarm that derailed a train, the murder rate in Laramie, the carnage of train accidents, and this term industrial carnage, right? And then you go from the Montenegrins to chimps, and maybe give the best explanation I've ever heard about how and why humans fight. And how and why some win and some lose. So if you've ever been a fighter, you've ever been in a fight, you've ever watched a fight, you need to read this. But then it's also happening as we have now gotten rid of Trump. We're pulling down in Afghanistan. When I got to the end of this section on fight, I literally was standing in my kitchen. I said, fucking A, Sebastian. I was like, fucking A. Like, I don't know. I just was like, yes, like you got this in a way that spoke to me in a way that I think is really eternal. But what do you take? You've been in so many fights. You've seen so many fights. People feel like life is a fight. I want to ask you now, because I and many others are feeling, frankly, depleted. How do you keep doing it? How do you keep doing it? How do you keep writing books? How do you keep fighting after loss? How do you keep creating these works? I told you when we were warming up, I feel almost like you're like Lady Gaga. Like every book is a reinvention of this amazing, and I mean that, flatteringly. You just recreate yourself with these big things. But how do you keep doing it?
I'm what I was talking about before about the sort of intoxication of walking, right? That you can hit a kind of ecstatic moment where some force is flowing through you, and it doesn't even feel like you're walking, you're just floating, and there's a intellectual version of that. There's a thought version of that, where when I'm writing something good, and everything I write that's not good, I throw out. So basically what you're getting at the end in my book is everything around that topic that I decided was good rather than not good. So when I'm writing something, but then there's these paragraphs that I'm like, wow, this is actually really good. Like, wow, did I just write that? Like that, like, oh, I'm tapped in. And what's interesting about it is it doesn't feel like it came out of me, right? It feels like I was sort of delivered something from on high, and I'm an atheist. So when I say that, I don't mean, God in quotes, right? I just mean a higher power, a deeper wisdom, a bigger mind. I don't know with the energy of the universe, whatever it is. I hate mysticisms, and I'm embarrassed to be using words like this, but I'm trying to describe a subjective feeling. It flows through you, and I'm lucky to be there to sort of like help it hit the page. And when that paragraph's not my paragraph, right? I mean, I know I wrote it, but it feels like I was channeling something, and I was lucky to have been chosen for the channeling. And so I will sometimes read things and think, Mike, wow, like I just learned something in this paragraph, like because it came from elsewhere. And when you're doing that, there's no fatigue, there's no depletion. You're doing God's work. And again, I'm an atheist, so when I say that, I mean it, metaphorically. But you're doing God's work, and when you're doing God's work, fatigued. I mean, there's no such thing, right? It's not. I mean, eventually your body will just fail you, but there's no. Your mind doesn't even know you're working, right? Because it's fully in, and that's one of the beautiful things of athletics, of music, of writing, of life. Basically, is when the you disappears, the ego disappears, and you're in service of something else. I mean, that's a totally intoxicating experience.
It's greatness. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say it. And I have been accused at times of being too flattering of some of my guests, but I think it's so well deserved here, and it needs to be heard. Like, you're crushing right now on some of the most important topics of our time. The work is going to last forever, but there's a point when, like, you have a very unique way of writing that I can relate to as a guy who has a lot of ideas happening at the same time. But the way you can go from, authoritarian regimes and the history of the railroad to, talking about how your feet feel, like there's this movement back and forth through time and space that's very, very powerful. But I mean, I'm dog-earing the shit out of this, right? Like, this book, I'm showing the book to the video. And there are so many times where you talk about, you have these lines that are, I don't know how else to say, they're kind of Sebastian lines, where you have a very profound statement and you're just like, so that's how it is. And it's just like, it's kind of like a yeah, motherfucker, like line. It's like you discovered it and you say, and that's how it is, without further explanation. So there's a lot of discipline in the brevity that I want to celebrate, because I know how hard that is. And somebody told me when I was reluctant to write my book, I think it was Max Cleland, he said, write it because your stories are not your own. And he said, you're carrying other people's stories. And that's what you've done miraculously here, Sebastian, is you've carried so many stories forward in a way that's really important. But I had some specific questions that I don't think I got. You specifically don't name the other guys who you're with on this journey. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I just say we.
And why? And if you can, who are they?
So I did that because I didn't want us as individuals to be mistaken for the point of the book, right? I didn't want the reader to think, oh, okay, these guys, Sebastian, Brendan O'Byrne, Guillermo, Dave Rolls, that I'm going to have to make these guys, I didn't want the reader to think, okay, I'm going to have to make these guys important in my mind. I'm going to have to learn about them. This book is about them. Like, no. We're a vehicle so that you, the reader, can experience America the way we experienced it. And I thought if I just avoided naming us or identifying us, like we got shot at in Pennsylvania once, right? And I don't think he was trying to hit us, but bullets were going over our heads. And, it had we'd all been in combat. So it had predictable reaction, right? And the way I write it in the book is, the only weapon we had other than our wonderful dog, Daisy, was a machete that we used for cutting up firewood and stuff. And in the book, I say one of us grabbed the machete and tried to circle around through the woods to come up behind the shooter in case he kept shooting, right? And I wrote it like that because who did that is not important, right? And I just named the guys who were there. Two of them were out at Restrepo, and this American outpost I was at in 07, 08. And one of them, Guillermo, was a Spanish photographer who, my dad grew up in Spain. I love Spain, and Guillermo is an amazing guy. But I got to know him because he was holding Tim's hand when Tim died. I mean, Tim bled out in the back of a pickup truck in Libya, a rebel pickup truck, and Guillermo was in the truck with him. Along with a photographer named Chris Hondros, who was essentially dead. And so I became, Guillermo became my brother, I lost him and got Guillermo. And so that was who was on the trip.
Thank you for sharing that. I had a list of very specific questions because
go for it.
I devoured this book. And my next question was, what's the name of the dog? And you said it's Daisy, because I don't think you named the dog in the book either, do you?
No, I don't think I do. I'm not sure. That's a good question. But I don't recall.
And then there was another specific question that I wanted to know, which is, you keep saying we'd stop, we'd have a drink, we'd have a smoke. What were you smoking? Were you smoking a cigarette, I assume? And if you
Yeah,
were, what brand? Because I
uh,
wanted to envision that.
I've had an off and on relationship with smoking since I was about 35. I never even tried a cigarette till I was 35. You know, I was a big athlete in high school and college. No, my whole life I have been. So the idea of smoking was completely alien to me. Like, it never even crossed my mind, right? When people typically start smoking in their teens or 20s. And at 35, I tried a cigarette. I was like, damn, there's something there. Like
Mhm.
that's not all bad. Like, so anyway, it's a occasional thing that I do, but it was Bugler. It was it's just the cheapest sort of pouch tobacco rolled up in paper.
See, I love this. Because I actually I've gone through. I was a kid and I smoked, and when I was in the Army, I smoked. And the guys in my platoon used to say they could tell how dangerous something upcoming was by how many cigarettes I smoked.
Yeah.
And then there've been times in my life where there's a ritual to it, and I think it was my Iraqi friend Isam who said something like, cigarettes make things go faster. He said like time, life, it makes things go by. But there's something about, look, if you're a writer and you've never smoked a cigarette, give it a shot. It feels like it needs to be almost a part of a ritual. But these little pieces of the dog, the when you talk about making tortillas and the cigarettes, these little pieces that are very artfully crafted, but also a bit vague intentionally,
Right.
are really, really powerful. And now you did the walk 400 miles over a couple periods of time, or was it one big shot?
It was over the course of a year. We would do 50 or 100 miles at a time. So it was like 5 trips or something like that. And so we left from Washington, D.C. We were going to walk to New York. And then we got to Philly and we were like, maybe we'll go west. We're tired of the East Coast. Let's go west. Maybe we'll go to Pittsburgh. So we turned west. At that point, it was midwinter. It was very, very cold. We just, most of the walk in Pennsylvania was along the Juniata River, which is the only river in Pennsylvania that trends east-west. And so we were basically walking a route. I mean, the Indian trails would follow the rivers through the mountains because it's easier to go through a river gap than to go around or over a mountain. The settlers' roads would follow the Indian trails, and then the railroads came in and followed the settlers' roads. So we were walking this sort of ancient passageway westwards through Pennsylvania. And a lot of the settlers in the 1700s, the Juniata was the sort of gateway to, what they called Indian territory, where, things got pretty real pretty quickly for them, and very, very dangerous. It was free, but it was dangerous. And so that was where the amazing country that we were walking through.
And this was before Trump was elected? What year was it? So it was before Trump. It was before pandemic. And, but you wrote it over the course of the last few years, I imagine, right? So that's kind of.
I wrote it last summer in about 3 months. I wrote it very quickly.
So what do you think about, I want to use this to transition into where we are. It's such a dissection of America. In a way that is, I think, timeless. But much is changing. Much has changed. But this idea of freedom is maybe under the microscope in America in a way it hasn't been in our lifetime. What do you think what did you learn about America then and through this book that you think is critical now? After the insurrection, I talked to you, I think 2 weeks after the insurrection, last time we talked, we're still having this existential crisis as a nation about, domestic terrorism and what happens next. And
right.
Trump is gone, but not gone. The pandemic is over, sort of, right, mostly. How did that journey help you understand where we are now?
Yeah, well, let's see. It's a very complex country, and it's clearly essentially segregated. I mean, there are Black communities and white communities. And if you walk through everything, it's unavoidable. Noticing that is sort of unavoidable. And sometimes those communities are only a few blocks by a few blocks in, West Philly or something. And sometimes they're huge areas. I mean, Pennsylvania, the part that we walk through is like 99.9% white. I mean, it's completely white. And and that, they're and pretty conservative, right? And I'm a Democrat. I didn't vote for Trump. I think probably 99.8% of that area voted for Trump, not literally, but it was overwhelmingly, a certain kind of white political culture, right? But this is what I would say. We walk through the ghettos of Baltimore, we walk through dangerous areas, we walk through wealthy suburbs, like whatever. Everyone is nice. Like every kind of, not every individual, but every group of people is nice, right? Like the people that all voted for the guy, the president that I couldn't stand, great people, right? The ghettos of Baltimore where it just looks like a gunfire is about to break out, watch your back, blah, blah, blah. The nicest people in the world. Oh my God. Like the poorer the town, the nicer the people, basically. People will come up to you like, hey, you guys need water. Does your dog need water? Like, can we do anything for you? I mean, these are in neighborhoods that look like, a war's been fought in them. Right. And even, we were once in a while we were on surface roads. And if we were on a surface, because there's areas of the train tracks that are so confined that if you're on them, they're so monitored that if you're on them, you'll get arrested. It was already hard to stay away from the cops. There's certain areas that you just like, if you go down, if you walk through that area, the cops are going to see you. You're right through a train yard or whatever. So we're on surface roads. And, if we walk through an affluent suburb on surface roads, someone would call the cops, right? They didn't do that in poor towns. It was in wealthy towns, the kind of town that I grew up in. Like that's where people get, you call the cops on you. But nevertheless, if they weren't calling the cops on you, they were great people. They were really, really nice people, right? So, I feel like where this country's at, we've got all of these divisions, all of these tribal identities. I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm Black, I'm white, I'm, whatever it is. And we think that those things reflect character, right? They think that somehow, those words, those categories are a kind of shorthand for some inner virtue or inner sin, right? Inner wrongdoing, right? Oh, he's a Democrat, as if that somehow characterizes the entirety of the person's soul, right? Or he's a Republican, or whatever, like pick your word, right? It's complete nonsense, right? I mean, there are sociopaths out there that are not good people. And there are people who are anti-democratic, even in this democracy, in this country, they are anti-democratic. And some of those are probably nice people. We just can't mess around with them because they're dangerous people, right? But mostly, I wish people would just stop attributing personal character traits on the basis of politics or religion or skin color, all that stuff. It's complete fucking nonsense. And it really has to stop because we're a crazy, weird conglomeration of a million things in this country. That's what makes it an amazing country. If we start attributing qualities to people because of stupid stuff like that, the country's not going to last.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a lot about this book that's also a warning about where we are and about where we've been and about what could come. But I'm glad you brought up that point, Sebastian, because I've lived with folks from overseas and I have a lot of friends who weren't born here. And they often tell me that they think Americans are really nice, like almost annoyingly nice, right? Like, yeah. And I've always said about New Yorkers, they're not friendly, but they're nice. They're not going to run across the street to go, "Good morning, how are you, Sebastian?" But if you say, "Hey, where do I get a slice of pizza?" "Oh, let me tell you, I got 5 places and here's where you go." And there's an engagement about Americans that I think is sincere and unique. And you pull that out in a very important and thoughtful way. Your lens, your focus is so astute and powerful. I want to ask you to turn it on our new president. He's passed his 100 days. He's a guy who connects with many of the areas that you talked about and kind of comes from parts of that world that you walk through. Yeah. Anybody from Pennsylvania, you got to read this book because I've never heard Pennsylvania described in the way that Sebastian does. But Sebastian Biden, he's almost at 200 days now. What do you think of him and where he is right now and how he's done?
It's interesting. I feel like he's doing with his presidency what I was doing with us on our walk. He's making himself not the point of the story, right? Like it's not about him. It's hard to even, and I mean this as a compliment, unlike Trump, who was the center of the story, regardless of what the policies were, I disagreed with most of them. Some of them I could wrap my mind around, but basically it didn't matter. Like Trump was the point for himself, and he thought he should be the point for the country, right? Biden is sort of the opposite. And sometimes I forget that Biden's president. Like you just you know what I mean? I mean that in a good way. He was like,
Yeah.
wow, he is just doing policy. And he's doing policy that seems to be, for the most part, policy that's popular with a majority of Americans and a significant portion of Republicans, right? So the infrastructure, the initiative, right? That's a broadly popular policy. The Corona package, the relief package some months ago, those were broadly popular things, which is very problematic for the Republicans because they're, opposed to something that, 70% of Americans are actually good with. So that's a horrible political conundrum to be in. I don't know why they're allowing themselves to be sort of painted into a corner like that by themselves, right? It just seems bizarre. But so what he's doing is I think he's basically sort of trying to lead by disappearing and following what most of the nation, because we're sensible people, knows are sensible policies. It's sort of miraculous after all the sort of ego politics of the last years. And I like Barack Obama, but he was a big personality in the government. You know what I mean? And I really liked him, but Obama was part of the story for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really important way of looking at it. I think Biden's been, the way you describe Biden is kind of like a referee in a game. Like you don't want the referees to be there, but if you're talking about the ref, it's probably not going the right direction, right? And I think that's an important part of what he's done. And the book is also a great exploration of leadership. And you talk about how leadership requires sacrifice, essentially, in a time when we're seeing people like Ted Cruz and others who seem to be all about themselves. And you're, juxtaposing that with the Seminole tribe and Apache leaders and others that have woven it into their culture about sacrifice and unity. So let me ask you this. It's Memorial Day weekend, kicks off summer. You're one of the guys who's going to be all over the media. I am trying to stay out of the media this year and really enjoy it, which is frankly hard, but I'm going to try. But I know that you're going to be a voice out there interpreting Memorial Day and interpreting the drawdown in Afghanistan for all Americans. And I think that's a good thing. I'd rather have it, you be in the chair than the average, talking head on cable television. So, you process all this. If I wanted to teach my, 22-year-old nephew about the meaning of Memorial Day or what he should know about Memorial Day, or my 5-year-old son and your children, what do you think people need to think about and know about Memorial Day?
I think I might repeat a story about my dad. My dad was a refugee from 2 wars. He passed away in 2012. He was a refugee from 2 wars. He grew up in Spain. His family fled when the fascists under Franco came in. And then they went to France, and then the Germans rolled into France a few years later, and he fled. His father was Jewish. So they left, came to this country. And I grew up, he was a huge pacifist, right? And I grew up in a very liberal environment. And during Vietnam, everyone I knew was opposed to Vietnam and, thought war was, whatever. It was a very classic, sort of liberal take on war and on Vietnam. And so when I got my selective service card in the mail, I thought the draft was over. I was like, what the hell is this? Like, the government wants my address in case they need to find me for their next Vietnam. Are you freaking kidding me? And I went to my father and I said, I'm not signing this. I thought this was the government. Are you kidding? And he was a pacifist, so I figured that he would agree with me. He said, no, you're definitely signing it. He said, there's thousands of American graves in France of young Americans who came overseas and died fighting fascism and saving the world. And you don't get to be part of this country without owing anything. And you may owe this country your life. Hopefully not. And if the war you're called up for is an unjust war, an immoral war, then it's your duty to protest it and go to jail protesting it if need be. But you owe something to your country. And when you sign that piece of paper, you're acknowledging that. and you're acknowledging you might even owe this country your life. Hopefully not. And Memorial Day, I mean, what he said, let me just say, when he said that, all of a sudden, signing that document went from being this sort of like bureaucratic, unpleasant bureaucratic task to, oh my God, I'm part of something greater. Like it made me proud, right? That I might be needed. I might be necessary. It made me proud, right? And Memorial Day is a day in memory of people that signed that card and did lose their life, and no country, every country requires people requires people to be willing to put their life on the line to defend their beliefs and their land and their people. Every single country in the world. And some people are unlucky and they die, and others are lucky and they don't. But acknowledging Memorial Day doesn't mean you're pro-war. It doesn't mean anything. It means that you understand the nobility of that decision to volunteer or to die in service. And that's true for firemen and cops and construction workers and teachers. And, there's a huge noble experiment going on in this country right now that involves an awful lot of people. And we're all necessary. Memorial Day is for people in the service who have paid that price.
You got me choked up with that one, man. And it was well said, and thank you. So I wish that if I don't know, maybe there is. We have a poet laureate in this country, right? I feel like if we had a writer laureate or whatever we would call it, I wish it would be you, because I feel like we would benefit from hearing your reflections on all things happening in this country on a regular basis. So we're talking about freedom and your book. We talked about Memorial Day. Summer's here. Right. People now, it's freedom, right? It's a lot more freedom than we used to have, right? It may not be full freedom, but it feels free. Maybe it's going to be the summer of freedom or celebration or love. It also maybe like, an army unit coming home to base after being deployed. So there's going to be some challenges, right? But people are excited. People are happy. People are feeling much better than they have before. What are you looking forward to this summer?
Well, let's see. I have a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. I've been working very hard. I just want to experience them at those ages for a couple of months. It took me a long time to be able to have a family. It's the greatest piece of luck and the greatest blessing that I can imagine. And I don't want the years to rush by while I'm so busy doing other things that I don't notice, So, I think that's what I'm looking forward to. I had a scary medical experience last summer, and I actually almost died. So this summer I'm looking forward to a summer without all that drama. I had an undiagnosed aneurysm in my abdomen that ruptured, and I lost 90% of my blood in about an hour. And I was on the doorstep. Basically, it took them an hour and a half to get me to the hospital, and I'd lost 90% of my blood, but I was still alive and I was still conscious, actually. And I saw my dead father showed up and was starting to console me, and they put 10 units into my neck, and that brought me back. But it was a miracle that I survived. And so this summer, I'm like, I want a summer without the medical adventure that I had last summer. And I'm just going to appreciate the fact that we're all alive and we're healthy, and here we are.
We're all celebrating that, man. I mean, that it's you have probably a full library of harrowing stories that haven't made the pages yet. That I am glad you're sharing with us and with the world. I want to just thank you for all that you're doing, because you're such a powerful and important voice. And I think you're also, I feel like it's a time, Sebastian, when people aren't reading books. And maybe some people went deep during the pandemic, but this is the book that I want to see in people's backpacks. I want to see it on the beach. I want to see it on the, on the dashboards of cars. And I think if we can get this in the hands of people across this country, we're going to have a much better summer and a much better future. So it's a tremendous service that you've done for all of us. And I'm grateful for that. And I hope you do get some time off. I do have to ask you one question that I didn't ask. I'm going to send you more whiskey, by the way. I don't know if I sent you the first one yet. And now we have new gear. So you're going to get some Independent Americans gear, and
Nice.
we got camping mugs. So if you ever go out on the trail again, you can
Awesome.
take some of these camping mugs with you, or at least take one of them. It's kind of indestructible. But you talk a bit about food on your trip. So we didn't ask you last time, pancakes or waffles? If you had to pick one, pancakes or waffles?
I think I'd have to go with waffles. If they're good waffles, there's cheap waffles out there that you pop in a toaster. I'm not talking about those waffles. I'm talking about real waffles. And if there's a side of bacon and some butter and maple syrup, you pretty much got me. That pretty much seals the deal.
When you guys came off the trail, you talked a lot about what you ate, which I remember, being in combat, people think you talk about sex all the time or you talk about combat. I feel like I talked about food more than anything else.
Yeah.
And there's also a celebration of wherever the hell you end up when you come off that trail and you walk into these diners. Yeah. It's a real celebration of that part of America too, that I think is really spectacular.
Thank you. Yeah. Those were some of my favorite moments. We'd stop in a town once in a while and grab some coffee and some pancakes or whatever. And those are always awesome moments.
Well, if you have a couple minutes after we wrap, I want to do a couple quick fire questions for our Patreon members that are most dedicated and supported. But I'm glad you're out there. Everybody needs to go check out Freedom. It's on bookshelves. It's on Amazon. You can download the audio, but it's the best Father's Day gift in America. And it's the best Independence Day gift in America. So, freedom ain't free. It's how much is it, Sebastian? I don't know. It's like 17, 18 bucks. So go get it and give it to a bunch of people, and you'll be doing a tremendous public service and helping us bring more light to contrast the heat. The great and powerful Sebastian Junger, my friend, thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much, Paul.